Good morning. I'm Pete Najarian on this Monday morning post Super Bowl. Everybody is so excited about the weekend. The weekend actually did deliver. We had a great game and everything. But before that, Friday, that was certainly an interesting day. And when you look at the first half of the day versus the second half of the day, just absolute opposing one another. Early part of the day, we did have that hot inflation numbers. Everybody definitely was kicking that around, but the markets actually seem to be digesting this pretty well. Now you get to the second half of the day, maybe it was a combination of further digestion of all the information, but also Russia, Ukraine, all of that seemed to really get the markets under some heavy duty pressure. We look over at the Dow down 500 points, close to 1.5%. You look over at the NASDAQ, same story, pretty nice. Actually didn't have that bad a movement early on until we got to the second half of the day, and then identical to the Dow, absolutely started to hit the skids, down 400 points for the NASDAQ. That's pretty significant. That's a 3% move, almost a 3% move to the downside. So that was really the backdrop to the day and the movements that we were seeing. And we also had a huge spike in crude, and for a lot of the same kind of reasons as people were reading into this whole thing. But crude actually was up over 93, got over 94. Over the weekend, it was up towards that 95 level. And we've come off a little bit from there, but definitely holding well above that $90 level for the price of crude. We also had that volatility index. And you take a look over at the VIX and you look and you see a move from 22 to 31. That is just absolutely an amazing range for the volatility index. Actually closed a little bit closer towards that 28, but pushing up towards that 30 level for the close. And looking at the highs of the day over 30, certainly we did have a lot of volatility, and for all the right reasons. When you look at the backdrop of what was going on in the global situation and a lot of the concerns that are out there, volumes was a monster day. 54 million contracts is what we traded on Friday. That is huge. That is another one of those close to biggest days that we have seen in the derivatives markets. And we've talked about that. We've talked about these volumes and what we've been averaging for the year. And it's just absolutely been incredible. Now, the only sector that actually closed in the green was energy. And it didn't just close green. It wasn't up just 0.25%. We're talking about nearly a 3% move for energy on that shift to the upside. Now, that was the story for energy. You look at some of the other areas, consumer discretionary, that was down about 3%. You look at financials, down about 1.5%. Semiconductors just slammed down 5%. Then, of course, technology, that was hit pretty good too. That was down nearly 3%. So when you look across, very, very little really showing up that actually came out on the positive side of things. But you certainly look at energy, not only did it finish green, but a really, really strong day. So you look over at what was some of the stocks and some of the areas that were moving the market. Certainly that beta side of energy, when you look at the XOP rather, a really, really nice move to the upside. Names like Baker Hughes, names like Occidental, Diamondback, Pioneer, those names, 4, 5, 6% moves to the upside. That's pretty extraordinary. Then you have a name like O'Reilly. Don't talk about that very often. That had a little bit of a move to the upside. Didn't get swept down with everything else. Chevron was up about 2% or so. But there was a lot of weakness out there, and it wasn't just technology. Take a look at Under Armour. Under Armour was down about 11 or 12% to the downside. That was getting hit. I mentioned the semiconductors, the SMH, but some of the names within some of these sectors like AMD, NXPI, Xilinx, NVIDIA, all these names definitely under some pretty solid pressures. Then you look over at some of the FANG names and some of the names that maybe aren't part of FANG, but they're definitely in that mega cap sort of tech world. And you look at Salesforce down a couple of, 4.5% or so. Then you look over, you see Apple, you see Facebook, you see Microsoft, you see Amazon, Google, Tesla, which we've been talking about Tesla as a great barometer really for the NASDAQ of late. And it's, I think, playing out even today. We'll get into that in just a second. But mega cap tech and, of course, Nike with a nice hit to the downside as well. That was off about 3 or so percent. So we come in this morning and if things are actually relatively quiet. Seems like there was some sort of a digestion there of that. And we weren't seeing too much selling, or not to the same degree, not so much buying. But early on, we're down about 80% or 80 points rather for the Dow, down about 50 or 60 points for the NASDAQ. NASDAQ's been moving up and up and up and actually getting into positive territory. It's been somewhere between flat and maybe up about 20 or 30 points to the upside. The Dow, on the other hand, just continues to get pounded. It was at 80 early pre-markets. Then it was down about 130 just after the opening. And it was about down 280 about 45 minutes into the day, down over 300 points just a little while ago. It might be moving around. We know that in this first hour, so much shifting, very much like the second or the last hour of the day, rather. When we see that movement, oftentimes it absolutely is just incredible towards the latter part of the day. We'll see if this is one of those kind of days as well. But the first hour, that's exactly what we're seeing. And the Dow is definitely under pressure. Volatility, yeah, it's pushing up and holding right near that 30 level. So call it right around 30. We also look over at crude, as I mentioned, up towards that 95. It was very near 93. Last I looked, it was trading about 93.50. So somewhere between 92, call it, maybe 93.50. That's where we find ourselves for crude. So another lift. You look at the 10-year. It was right around 198. Before you know it, you take a blink and there you see it right there, about 2%. So a little bit above that 2% level. Then we've got the comments from Bullard once again. And, we talk about the Fed all the time. What are they going to do? Well, obviously, over the conversation of late last week, it sure looks like there's at least some, or at least one with Bullard talking about rate hikes and maybe the process and maybe the size and how many there might be. And that does shake things up. That does rattle things up just a little bit. I did mention Tesla. And when I mentioned Tesla, here's what I think is pretty interesting. Early on, it was basically flat, maybe even a little bit down. It was trading right close to that 860 level. Before you know it, it started bouncing to the upside. And that's when we really did see the NASDAQ start to get a little bit of that pull to the upside. It was up about 2% early. So again, keeping an eye on Tesla as a bit of a barometer for what we are seeing in that sort of area. By the way, we had that energy. I talked about how strong that was. Today, that's actually a leader to the downside. It's actually down a little over 2% or so. So that is a little bit of a pull on the markets. Then you've got technology kind of just sort of in that flat area. We have some movement in certain other sectors as well. Financials, I was looking at those down about 1% or so. Healthcare down about 1.25%. So a little bit of a pull here and there, and we'll see as we get through the day. This is just the first hour. So early on, actually, semiconductors look pretty good. They were up about 0.75%. And the contributors to that, AMD looked very strong. Micron looked great. NVIDIA, Zebra, some of those names all kind of moving to the upside, having a pretty decent start to the day. A name like Splunk, which we don't talk about very often, although this is not necessarily because of anything other than the possibility of a bid for the company that was just getting kicked around. It was up about 7.5% early on. Lucid, we've been talking about that name for a while now and how it seems like it's been pulling more and more to the downside. Well, today that's turned around. That's a little bit higher. You've got Zoom, you've got Disney. So you've got a nice balance, but certainly not enough of a balance to balance out the Dow the way we're seeing things right now. I look over at energy, and I talked about that, how it was so strong on Friday and a little bit weaker today. Some of those names moving to the downside are in that beta name world. When you look at APA and Devon, and you look at Marathon Oil and PSX and EOG, those all pulling to the downside today. Moderna down about 4%, or at least close to 4%. Datadog, which had a great run last week, down a couple of percent as well. And some of those Chinese names showing a little bit of weakness today. Looked over at PDD. I looked at NetEase. They're pulling back just a little bit. Throw in maybe a Cisco off of the Dow, and you've got yourself down about 1.5% or so. And that's pulling on things as well. So I got two unusuals for you. We're out of here. I will not be on the halftime, I don't think, until Wednesday or something like that. Boy, did we have a great time out there. We were in Hollywood. We had just a fun time out there with Adam Carolla. That was great one day. And we were with the golf, the celebrity golf. We were also with the celebrity on the flag football out there at Pepperdine. That was outstanding. And how about that game? Again, just phenomenal. So, going to start off with AMD. I mentioned the semiconductors. AMD stands out. It was trading about 115.70. We had a buyer of 9,800 of the February 118 call. So they're going out of the money, but staying very, very short term. So these only have a few days to really pan out. They were about 270 up to about $3.40. That was when the stock was at 115.70. We know how fast things are moving. Just giving you a little bit of a reference point. Next, I've got Freshworks, a name I've not seen, so that's unusual. And it's also interesting to see a name like this. Not only have we not seen it, but to get the kind of option paper that we're seeing in here, which is stock trading around 20 and a half, buyer of 10,000. Now, these look like they're rolled up at least from the 20s where they had sold 5,000, and here they are buying 10,000 of these 22 and a half calls for about 50 cents. That one definitely stood out, a name that has not hit that I can recall in the past. We maybe have had it. I don't recall, but also a nice large trade and somebody taking some money off the table. Now, this is a stock that's been a heck of a lot higher than this. It's on the lower end, so keep that in mind. So we're starting to see a little bit of positive movement, and somebody who had already bought those 20 calls rolling out of those, taking some profits there and rolling up to these 22 and a half calls, trading 50 cents, 10,000 of those as well. Folks, have a great day of trading. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And as you're navigating these markets, just know this, they got a lot of volatility. We obviously are keeping an eye on crude. We got the eye on the Fed and, of course, Ukraine and Russia. So there's a lot of different catalysts out there. Have a great day of trading.